Okay, so today we are learning about scale factor and scale drawings. So, a scale factor, we've got 3 steps in order to find that scale factor. A scale factor tells you how much a drawing of something is being multiplied to get to its original size. So if you've ever looked at a map, like a printed out map, you have a scale at the bottom that tells you maybe like 1 centimeter is equal to 1,000 miles. Okay, so that scale, the 1,000 miles is equal to 1 centimeter, that tells you that every centimeter that you measure on that map, that 1 centimeter actually stands for 1,000 miles. If you draw, or if you're building a house and you get a blueprint drawn of your house, of course the house is way too big to draw on a piece of paper, right? But you can use a scale and you can scale it down to be able to draw a house on a piece of paper. So that's just 2 examples as to how scale factors and scale drawings are used in the real world. So basically it gives you a way to draw something very large that you can't fit on a piece of paper on something that you can't fit on a piece of paper. Okay. So if we want to find a scale factor, the first step that I'm going to do is I'm going to write that scale as a ratio. What does a ratio look like? How is it written? 5/1. So what is 5/1?
5.
A whole number or a decimal or a...
Whole number.
If you write it as 5/1, it's a fraction, right? So a ratio is going to be in the form of a fraction. And then, of course, it's going to show that the scale length, or it's going to compare that scale length to the actual length. Okay. So that very first step is to write your scale as a ratio. Once you do that, your second step is going to be to change the lengths to the same unit of measurement and then drop those measurements. So, using my example from the map, if you have 1 centimeter, which is actually equal to 1,000 miles, if you write that as a ratio, you would have 1 centimeter over 1,000 miles. So you have centimeters over miles. In order to find the scale factor, you need to convert miles to centimeters. So you need to have the same units on top and on bottom. Okay. So once you convert your units, then you have the same units on top and bottom, meaning that you can just cross them out. Okay. Once you do that, then you have to simplify. So a scale factor will never have units with it, and it will never be unsimplified. So it has to be completely simplified for it to be a scale factor. Okay. So let's look at example A. It says to suppose a scale model has a scale of 2 inches, which equals 3 feet. They want to know what the scale factor is. So my scale is 2 inches, which equals 3 feet. So my first step up here is to what? Write the scale as a ratio. So that means I'm going to write 2 inches over 3 feet. So now that I have it as a ratio, my step 2 is going to be convert it to inches. Because I can't convert 2 inches to feet, right? If I did, it would be like a point something, a decimal. So I want to convert my feet to inches. So how many feet are, or how many inches are in 1 foot? So there's 12 inches in 1 foot. So that means that in 3 feet, there are 12 inches. You just multiply your 3 times 12, and you get 36 inches. Okay. So you can write it as another ratio of 2 inches over 36 inches. So now that my units are the same on top and bottom, I can drop them, leaving me with just 2 over 36. But remember, for it to be a scale factor, it has to be completely simplified. So how can I simplify 2 over 36?
Divide by 2.
By dividing top and bottom by 2, which gives me 1 over 18. So 1 over 18 is my scale factor. Okay. Yes, ma'am. because I converted this 3 feet into inches. So, hold on a minute. Yes, so 12 times 30, or 12 times 3 gives me 36. Because 3 feet, multiply that by 12 inches per each foot, that means there's 36 inches.
So, on the 3 feet, if it were inches, would we convert that to centimeters? Like, what?
You just want to be able to get the same units on top and bottom. Right. So, basically, you're always going to convert that larger unit to the smaller unit. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that is.
Alright, so example B, it says that the scale is 2 inches, which equals 4 yards. So, my first step, again, is going to be to write that as a ratio. So, I've got 2 inches over 4 yards. And then I want to be able to convert that yards to inches. So, right here it tells me that 1 yard equals 3 feet. And then we already know from previously that 3 feet is equal to 36 inches. We got that by multiplying 3 times 12, right? Because 3 feet, there's 12 inches in 1 foot, so 3 times 12 gives me 36 inches. So then if I'm trying to convert yards to inches, there's 36 inches in 1 yard. So if I have 4 yards, that means I'm multiplying 4 times 36, and I get 144 inches. So then you can rewrite that ratio with the same units as 2 inches over 144 inches. Since they are the same units, you can cancel them. So then you just have 2 over 144. And you can divide top and bottom by 2, which simplifies to 1 over 72. So 1 over 72 is your scale factor. Okay. Questions on scale factors? We good? Okay. Flip over. So now we've got scale drawings.
Oh, wow.
So, on this one example, or first up here in this box, it tells me that a scale drawing represents something that's too large or too small to be drawn or built. So exactly what I was explaining with on a map or a blueprint of your house, okay? So the scale model is going to represent something that's too large. And then the scale is what gives you the relationship between the drawing or the model measure and the actual measure. Okay. So if we have this map right here, it tells me that each grid or each box represents 50 yards. So that's my scale. So each box right here is going to represent 50 yards. They want to know how you can find the distance between Patrick's Point and Agate Beach. So the first thing you've got to do is set up a proportion. When we're setting up our proportions, I'm always going to use my scale as one of my ratios. So my scale is 1 grid equals 50 yards, or 1 unit is 50 yards. So if I write that as a ratio, I've got 1 unit over 50 yards, and then I've got to set it equal to another ratio. If I count the units between the points, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I've got 8 units in between those 2 cities. So that's how I write my second ratio. 8 units over, I don't know how many yards that is. I just know that it's 8 units. Okay. So that's my variable. And then I'm going to use my cross products like we learned a couple weeks ago. And I've got 1 times x equals 50 times 8. And then once I simplify that, I get x is equal to 400. So that means that there's 400 yards in between those 2 points. Okay. So that's how we're going to solve everything in this chart. We're going to have to set up a proportion. And then we're going to have to find that actual distance between the cities. Okay. So number 1 is done for us on the right-hand side of this paper. So it tells us that we're finding the actual distance between those pairs of cities. And if we need to, we've got to round to the nearest tenth. Okay. So between those 2 cities, I know that my map distance is 6.35 centimeters. And then my scale is 1 centimeter equals 20 miles. So the first thing I have to do is set up a proportion with that information. Remember, like I said, we're always using that scale as your first proportion. So it told me that I had 1 centimeters was 20 miles. So that's why 1 centimeters is over 20 miles. And then my map distance is 6.35 centimeters. I know that that has to go on top because remember, centimeters is on top of my scale factor, or my scale fraction. So that means centimeters has to be on top of the second one. You have to have the matching units on both tops and both bottoms. So now that my proportion's set up, I have to cross multiply. So 1 times x equals 20 times 6.35. And once you multiply those numbers, you get x is equal to 127 miles. So the distance between Los Angeles and San Diego is 127 miles. So if I want to do number 2, I need to find the distance between Lexington and Louisville. So I'm going to use both of these pieces of information to set up a proportion. We all should be writing this on our paper. So I'm going to work number 2 underneath number 1 up here. So if I'm writing my proportion or my ratio for my scale, what was my scale for number 2?
1 centimeter equals 25.
1 centimeter equals 5 miles. So if I write that as a ratio, that means I have 1 centimeter on top and 5 miles on bottom. So that's my ratio for my scale. Now I need to find the ratio for my actual map. So it tells me that my map distance is 15.6 centimeters. So is that going to go on top of the fraction or on bottom? On top, because it's centimeters. So 15.6 centimeters. What goes on bottom? X. Because we don't know, right? That's what we're trying to figure out. So X miles. So now that I have my proportion, what do I need to do now?
You need to cross multiply.
Cross multiply. So that means I have 1 times X, which equals 15.6 times 5. So when I do that, X is equal to what? What's 15.6 times 5? What? 16?
16.
I don't think so. 78. 15.6 times 5 gives me 78.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
78x.
Can you go over that cross thing again? Because I'm confused about that.
Remember, you're cross multiplying. So you're multiplying the numbers that are across from each other. So 1 times x, and then you're setting it equal to 5 times 15.6. So you're just multiplying the numbers that are straight across from each other. Or diagonally across from each other, I guess. So if I got x equals 78, it's 78 what? Miles. Guys, we should all be writing this down. Wake him up. Behind you. Carlin. Look at him. All right, so number 3, I've got to do the same thing. I've got to set up a proportion in order to find the actual distance between those two cities. So somebody tell me, raise your hand and tell me how to write my proportion. Amaya.
2 cities over 15 miles.
Okay. And then it equals what? Roman?
16.27 over x.
Good. 16.27 centimeters over x miles. I know that 16.27 centimeters goes on top because it tells me in the chart that The map distance is 16.27 centimeters, and that centimeters is how I know that it goes on top, because I put 2 centimeters on top of my scale fraction. So now I need to solve for x, so that means I've got to cross multiply. So I'm multiplying 2 times x, and then setting that equal to 15 times 16.27. So somebody tell me what 15 times 16.27 is.
I like your earrings.
Thank you. In a second, I'll let you know. What did I get, Tyler Gray?
244.05.
Okay.
That is a mouth.
So now I have 2x equals 244.05. So how do I solve for x? This is an equation now, right? So how do I solve for x?
You multiply 2 by that number.
Divide, right? Because it's 2 times x, so you have to do the opposite.
Oops.
So divide both sides by 2,
122.
and x is equal to what?
122.024.
122.025. In my directions, it tells me to round to the nearest tenth. So my 10th position is right here where my 0 is, right? So if I'm rounding to that position, does that 2 make me go up or make me stay the same? Stay the same because it's less than 5. If it was greater than 5, then I would bump that up to a 1. But it's less than 5, so it just stays at 0. So
122.
you can either write 122.0 or just 122. All right, number 4. I need to set up a proportion first. So my first ratio in that proportion is going to be my scale. So I know that my scale is 1/2 centimeter over 20 miles. And then what am I going to set that equal to? 11.73 centimeters on top. And then what's on bottom? X miles. So now that I have my proportion, I can use my cross products. So I have 1/2 times x equals 11.73 times 20. What is 11.73 times 20? $234.6. So now how do I solve for x? Divide by what, Dominique? Divide by 1/2. Both sides. So x is equal to what?
469.2.
Okay. Is that already rounded to the nearest tenth? Yes. Because my 2 is in my 10th position. So that means that the distance between Miami and Jacksonville is what? Miles.
Can't forget the miles.
Alright, so for numbers 5 through 7, we're finding the length of each object, and then we're also finding the scale factor. So by finding the length of each object, we're going to do exactly what we just did. Set up a proportion and solve for x. And then we also have to find this, the scale factor. So number 5 is done for me again right here. So it says that a pond is 85 feet across, and then my scale is 1 inch equals 4 feet. So to set up my proportion, I'm going to use my scale as 1 ratio, so 1 inch over 4 feet. And then I'm going to use that information about the pond being 85 feet for my other ratio. So since it's feet That's why I know that they're both on bottom. And then I put X on top.
So is that it?
And then you have to cross multiply to solve for X. So 4 times X equals 1 times 85. So 4X equals 85, which equals 21.25 inches. Or if you write it as a fraction, it's 21 1/4 inches. Okay. So that's my length of the scale drawing. But I'm not done. Now I need to find the scale factor. So if we remember, this is what we did on the front of this page. My first step is to write the scale as a ratio, which we actually already did in my proportion up here. So I have 1 inch over 4 feet. And then in order for it to be a scale factor, what do I have to do with my inches and my feet? I have to get them to the same unit, right? So that means I've got to convert the feet to inches. So I know that how many inches are in 1 foot? 12. So I do 4 times 12, which gives me 48 inches. So then I have 1 inch over 48 inches. My units are the same, so I can cancel those inches, and my scale factor is simply just 1 over 48. So that's what we're doing for number 6 and number 7. We're finding our length, and then we're also finding the scale factor. So let's look at number 6. So the first thing I want to do is find the length. So how do I do that? What do I have to set up first? What is it called when what I have to set up? A ratio, which is equal to another ratio, which is called a what? A proportion. So what's my first ratio going to be?
1 centimeter. Is it 1 centimeter?
Mm-hmm.
Over to 25 meters.
Good. 1 centimeter over 25 meters equals 200 meters. Where does that go, top or bottom? Bottom. And I'm trying to find out how many centimeters, right? So it's going to be X centimeters. So now I have my proportion set up. Now I need to cross multiply. So 1 times 200 is 200. And then 25 times X is just 25X. So how do I solve for X?
You divide 25 from both sides.
Divide both sides by 25. And what is X equal to? 8 centimeters, right? Because I was finding X, which was X centimeters, so that means it's 8 centimeters. So, excuse me. So I found my length. Now what I have to do? Am I done with the problem? No, what else do I have to find?
What X equals?
What did the directions tell me? Emily? I have to find the scale factor also. So what's my first step in finding a scale factor? The steps are on the other side of this page, so it's not really hard to flip it over and tell me. Okay, what's the very first step?
Scale is a ratio.
Right, the scale as a ratio. So, what is that? I've already done this. To find the length. So, what is the scale as a ratio? 1 centimeter over 25 meters. So then step 2 is to convert my larger to the smaller. So meters is larger. So I need to convert my meters into centimeters. It tells me right here, it says hint, there are 100 centimeters in 1 meter. So how do I change that meters to centimeters? Multiply what, Dominique? The meters by 100? So 25 times 100? Which is 2,500. Does everybody see how I got that? It tells me that there's 100 centimeters in 1 meter. So you multiply however many meters you have by 100. So now that my units are the same, what can I do with them? Cross them out. So what is my scale factor? 1 over 25. Questions on that one? Yes. Oh, 2,500, sorry. All right, number 7. First thing I want to do is find the length. So I need to set up a proportion. So it says that the flag is 5 feet wide and the scale is 2 inches equals 1 foot. So how do I write a proportion for that? What's that first ratio going to be?
5 feet. Is it 5 feet? Which one we own? 7.
What's my first ratio, Dominique?
1 foot over 2 inches.
Okay. You want to do 1 foot over 2 inches? So what's it going to be equal to then? Okay, if we put foot on top and inches on bottom, then that means my 5 feet has to go on top, right? So 5 feet over X inches. So normally, my scale says 2 inches equals 1 foot. We've been just putting the 2 inches over 1 foot, but Dominique wanted to do 1 foot over 2 inches, which is fine. You just have to remember that you have to match up your units. So that means if your feet are on top here, your feet must be on top here. Okay. So now I have this proportion set up, so I need to use my cross product. So that means I have 1 times x, which is just x, right? Equals 5 times 2, which is what? 10. So x is equal to 10 inches. And that's my length. Am I done yet? No. What do I have to find next, Tyler? My scale factor. So what's the first step in finding a scale factor?
Make it into a ratio.
Write it as a ratio. So do we want to keep feet on top or we want to switch it to the bottom?
Keep on top.
Let's switch it over to the bottom. Because we want our larger unit to be on bottom. Okay. So 2 inches per 1 foot. So that was one step. Now what do I have to do for number 2? Multiply what? I've got inches on top and feet on bottom. What do I need them to be? The same. So I need to convert what to what? Feet to inches. So how many inches are in 1 foot? 12. So you just have 1 times 12, which is 12. So 2 inches over 12 inches My units are the same now, so what can I do with them? Cross them out. And my scale factor is what? Is a scale factor... Right, it's not a scale factor until it's completely simplified. So it simplifies to 1/6, and that's your scale factor. Any questions? Okay, your homework is in your book. It's page 288, numbers 10 through 20, and then number 27 and number 30. So, there's the first couple of problems you have to measure with a ruler. So I'm going to pass out some rulers.